So, have you ever stopped to wonder why you feel instantly drawn to someone? I mean, why do certain behaviors in relationships feel completely hardwired into our brains, almost like they're totally out of our control? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to strip away all our cultural baggage and really look under the hood of human nature. We're going to uncover the raw biological, neurochemical, and evolutionary drivers behind why we do what we do. We'll peel back the evolutionary curtain and look objectively at the biology of what happens 1 second before, 1 minute before, and literally 1 million years before an action even takes place. Here is a quick look at our roadmap for today as we march backward in time through a bunch of different scientific disciplines. First, proximal versus distal motivation. Second, the human animal. Third, dopamine and the maybe. Fourth, the chemistry of connection. Fifth, the biology of identity. And finally, number 6, the pheromone illusion. All right, let's jump right into section 1, proximal versus distal motivation. Let's dive into this first concept by imagining a pretty wild scenario. Say Martians come down to Earth, and they're enthusiastically exchanging cultural notes with us humans. The Martians decide to demonstrate their highly mechanical, entirely instantaneous method of reproduction. It's efficient, it's perfectly logical. Then a human couple demonstrates our method. And by the time they finish, they're just a sweaty, exhausted, panting mess. The Martians are utterly amazed, but they ask a very profound question. Okay, but where is the new human? The Earthlings explain that, well, it actually takes about 9 months to gestate. To which the Martians logically reply, then why on earth were you in such a frantic, sweaty rush at the end? That joke perfectly highlights a massive fallacy we make about behavior. See, humans aren't calculating how to maximize their genetic legacy in the heat of the moment. That's what we call a distal explanation, the long-term, million-year evolutionary reason a behavior exists. But in reality, our behavior is entirely driven by proximal mechanisms, and that simply means it feels good right now. Think about eating a giant slice of chocolate cake. Distally, you evolved to crave dense calories to survive harsh winters. But proximally, you're eating it because sugar hits your tongue and releases a huge rush of pleasure. Immediate sensory stimuli and internal neurobiology drive our actions, not some conscious desire to evolve the species. Moving on to section 2, the human animal. We really love to assume that things like non-reproductive sex, extensive foreplay, and homosexuality make us uniquely advanced, totally separate from the animal kingdom. But ethology, which is the objective study of animal behavior, proves otherwise. Other highly social animals, like bonobos and dolphins, do all of these things too. What actually makes humans biologically bizarre is having egalitarian sex, which basically means no subset of the population is formally restricted from reproducing by an alpha, and our totally bizarre insistence on doing it in private. I mean, in the animal kingdom, if you're mating, you generally want everyone to see it to prove your fitness and status. Hiding away in a bedroom is actually a very strange evolutionary quirk. This quote from researcher Martha McClintock is absolutely crucial because it reminds us that context is literally everything. To really understand biology, we have to study animals in their natural environment. Imagine trying to understand how a dolphin swims by watching it struggle in a tiny bathtub. You'd get completely the wrong idea, right? It's the exact same with mammals. In a tiny laboratory cage, female rats appear entirely passive. But in a natural setting, where they actually have room to move, they engage in highly complex, active proceptive behaviors. That means active flirting, ear-wiggling, and signaling readiness to a mate. It's a continuous chaining interplay of behaviors that we completely miss if we strip away the environmental context. All right, section 3, dopamine and the maybe. Okay, so everyone talks about dopamine as the ultimate reward chemical, but the neuroscience tells a completely different, honestly much more fascinating story. Dopamine isn't actually about the reward itself. It's primarily released in anticipation of the reward. Think about ordering a package online. The massive rush of excitement happens when you click buy and when you're tracking the shipping. But by the time it actually arrives and you open the box, the thrill is mostly gone. Dopamine is really the engine of goal-directed behavior. It provides the energetic motivation required to actually reach the finish line. Now, check out the massive dopamine explosion on this chart when the reward probability is exactly 50%. If an animal knows it'll get a reward 100% of the time, dopamine rises predictably. If it's 25 or 75%, it rises a bit more because of the variable. But the absolute peak of neurochemical arousal is the maybe. A 50% intermittent reward rate just hacks our mesolimbic system perfectly. And this completely explains the addictive thrill of a slot machine in Las Vegas. And it brilliantly explains the agonizing early stages of romance. You know, when a new crush texts you right away sometimes and then ignores you for hours other times, that unpredictability just skyrockets your dopamine, making you work incredibly hard for that intermittent reinforcement. And this neurochemistry gets incredibly specific when we look at how couples actually stay together. Let's use a fire analogy. In monogamous animals, D2 dopamine receptors are the spark. They mediate the initial thrilling formation of a pair bond. But a spark can't burn forever, right? Immediately after that bond is formed, those D2 receptors have to downregulate, while D1 receptors, think of them as the slow-burning logs, must upregulate just to maintain faithfulness. If that complex chemical handoff fails to happen, the fire dies, and the animal simply moves on to form a new bond with someone else. Let's get into Section 4, the chemistry of connection. Moving into the actual endocrinology of why we form deep attachments, two hormones really take center stage: oxytocin in females and vasopressin in males. And what's deeply fascinating here is how evolution actually works. See, evolution rarely builds completely new systems from scratch. Instead, it uses biological duct tape to adapt what's already there. These two hormones originally evolved for completely different, very basic physiological functions, things like maternal milk letdown and regulating blood pressure. But over millions of years, evolution adapted them, turning them into neuromodulators in the brain to create monogamous social bonds and intense interpersonal trust. The sheer power of these hormonal systems is just mind-blowing. Scientists can actually take a specific species of vole that is naturally wildly polygamous and simply insert extra vasopressin receptors onto their dopamine neurons. Just by making that one genetic tweak, those notoriously polygamous voles suddenly become faithfully monogamous. It literally rewires their social nature. So where do humans sit in all this? Well, we aren't a strict tournament species like peacocks, where huge males violently compete for harems of females, but we aren't purely monogamous like swans either. Predictably, human genetics land right in the conflicted middle. We possess genetic variants that sit somewhere between a strict pair bonding species and a highly polygamous one.
Next up, Section 5, the biology of identity.
To really understand identity and orientation, we have to look deep inside the brain at the hypothalamus, which is a primitive region that regulates our core drives. Back in the late 1980s, neuroanatomist Simon LeVay conducted a landmark study on a tiny cluster within this area called the INH. Generally speaking, this region is reliably twice as large in heterosexual men as it is in women. But LeVay discovered that the INH region in gay men was, on average, exactly half the size of straight men. It perfectly matched the anatomical size of straight women, pointing directly to a biological and anatomical basis for orientation that's quite literally hardwired into the brain's architecture. Another profoundly controlled anatomical study looked at transsexuality by examining a completely different brain region, the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, or BNST for short. This region is dimorphic, which means it naturally takes two distinct physical forms or sizes based on sex. And what the researchers discovered was incredibly striking. When they looked at the brains of transgender individuals, the anatomical size of the BNST matched the gender the individual identified as, not their chromosomal sex assigned at birth. Now, the crucial controls in this research revealed something really important. These specific brain structures were completely unrelated to any hormone replacement therapies the individuals might have undergone. In fact, the exact same anatomical markers were seen even in individuals who had never medically transitioned at all. So the scientific consensus from these anatomical studies is clear. This isn't a psychological condition. It is a biological reality of possessing the dimorphic brain structure of one gender while being born into the physical body of another.
And finally, Section 6, the pheromone illusion.
Let's step outside the brain for a second and look at the environmental triggers setting all of this off. Pheromones are these invisible chemical signals floating in the air that can communicate gender, health, and even fear. But there's a massive catch. It takes an intact system of reproductive hormones, like testosterone or estrogen, to generate these signals. And even more surprisingly, it requires those exact same hormones to perceive them. Imagine standing in a room full of loud, blaring radios, but you lack the specific antenna to pick up the frequency. If those specific hormones aren't currently circulating in your system, you are essentially chemically blind to the invisible messaging happening all around you.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought about human attraction and the illusion of free will. Think about this. Most classic perfumes, like musk, are actually formulated from the chemical breakdown products of male animal sweat and pheromones. Yet they are overwhelmingly purchased by women, driven by their own estrogen systems. So if a perfume relies on male hormonal breakdown products, is it really designed for the women who buy it to enjoy? Or is it unknowingly designed to trigger the hidden chemical signals driving the biology of the men around them? From a massive dopamine spike 1 second before an action to the evolutionary adaptations made 1 million years ago, it really makes you wonder, who's actually in control, you or your biology? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the world around you.